It was just a wedding photo until you zoomed in on the bride's hand and uncovered a dark secret. The afternoon light streamed through the tall windows of the Atlanta Historical Archive as Dr. Rebecca Morrison carefully reviewed a collection of early 20th century photographs donated by an anonymous estate, mixed in with faded portraits and stiff formal gatherings. One image made her stop cold. A wedding photograph from 1903. A white man in a dark three-piece suit sat stiffly beside a black woman in a detailed white wedding gown. Their hands were joined between them in what should have been a sign of unity. Rebecca's 15 years as a historical archivist had trained her to notice things that felt off. This photograph felt wrong in many ways. In 1903, Georgia interracial marriage was not just frowned upon, it was illegal. The state's anti-miscegenation laws, in place since 1750 and strengthened after the Civil War, made such unions criminal acts punishable by prison. Yet here was what looked like clear photographic proof of exactly that. She flagged the image for high-resolution scanning, unable to shake the uneasy feeling that held on to her. 2 weeks later, while reviewing the digital files, Rebecca carefully zoomed in on different details. The studio backdrop, the woman's jewelry, the man's hard expression. Then she focused on their joined hands. As she increased the zoom, her blood went cold. The bride's fingers were not simply resting. They were placed on purpose in a distress signal, her thumb and index finger forming a small but clear cry for help. Rebecca's hands shook as she zoomed in even more. The woman's fingers were arranged with clear intent, hidden inside what looked like a normal wedding pose, but actually screaming for rescue. This was not just an illegal marriage, it was proof of something far darker. A silent scream had been frozen in time for 120 years, waiting for someone to finally see it and understand. Rebecca immediately contacted Dr. Marcus Williams, a specialist in African American history and Jim Crow-era records. When he arrived at her office that evening, she showed him the photograph without saying a word. Marcus studied it in silence, his face growing more troubled by the second. "This shouldn't exist," he finally said. "Georgia's anti-miscegenation laws in 1903 made this impossible, unless?" "Unless what?" Rebecca asked, even though she feared the answer. Marcus leaned back, his face dark. "Unless this was never a legal marriage, unless this photo shows something else entirely. Coercion, captivity, or worse. Look at her face. That is not a bride's look. That is fear barely being held back." They spent hours studying every detail. The studio stamp read, Morrison and Wright Portrait Studio, Atlanta, Georgia, August 1903. A faint note on the back read only, Mr. Charles Whitfield and servant, not wife, not bride. Servant. The word hung in the air like a curse. "He didn't even try to hide what she was to him," Marcus said quietly. "This photo was never meant to show a marriage. It was meant to show ownership." Rebecca felt sick. But why the wedding dress? Why stage it this way? Marcus pulled up historical records on his laptop. Control, humiliation. Some white men during this time used their power over black women in horrible ways. They could not legally marry them, but they could still force them into situations that copied marriage. A twisted imitation that satisfied their desires while keeping their social status. The woman had no rights, no protection, no way out. That night, Rebecca could not sleep. She kept seeing the woman's face, her carefully placed fingers, the silent scream that had crossed more than a century. Who was she? What had happened to her? And most painful of all, had anyone seen her signal back then? Or had it gone unseen until now, far too late to help her? The next morning, Rebecca and Marcus started their search at the Georgia State Archives. They needed to identify both people in the photo. The name Charles Whitfield was their first lead. The archivist, an elderly black woman named Mrs. Dorothy Hayes, who had worked there for 35 years, grew tense when she heard the name. Charles Whitfield, she repeated slowly. That name still carries weight in certain circles, but not the kind anyone should be proud of. She went into the records room and came back with several boxes. The Whitfield family had been powerful in Atlanta from the 1870s through the 1920s. They built their wealth in cotton and textiles after the war. Charles Whitfield took over the family business in 1898. The 1900 census showed Charles Whitfield, age 28, living in a large home on Peachtree Street with great wealth and many servants listed in his household. Rebecca's stomach tightened as she read the names. All black women and girls, ages ranging from 14 to 30. One entry stood out. Louisa, age 16, domestic servant, literate. Marcus found property records showing Whitfield owned several properties around Atlanta, including a textile factory where he employed dozens of workers, mostly black women and children, working in harsh conditions for very low pay. Newspapers from the time praised him as a progressive employer and a pillar of the community. The gap between his public image and what they were finding made them feel sick. They searched for more information about the woman in the photograph. Since she was listed only as servant and not by name, finding her identity was difficult, but Mrs. Hayes had a suggestion. If the photo was taken in August 1903, they should check city records for missing persons or strange reports around that time. Sometimes families tried to report when their daughters vanished, even if police did nothing. After 2 days of digging through broken and incomplete records, Marcus found a police report from September 1903. It was short and dismissive, but it gave them their first real lead. Report filed by Henry and Martha Johnson regarding their daughter, Louisa Johnson, age 19, employed in the household of Charles Whitfield. Family claims she has not been seen in over a month despite living just 2 miles away. Mr. Whitfield states Miss Johnson is fulfilling her contracted duties and is in good health. No evidence of wrongdoing. Case closed. Rebecca cross-checked the name with the 1900 census. There she was, Louisa Johnson, age 16 in 1900, living with her parents and 3 younger siblings in a small home near Auburn Avenue. Her father, Henry, worked as a carpenter, her mother, Martha, as a laundress. The family could read and write and owned their small home. They were part of Atlanta's growing black middle class, trying to build a life under the heavy weight of Jim Crow. Marcus found more records. In 1902, Henry Johnson was injured in a construction accident and could no longer work. The family fell into debt. A note in a local church charity record showed they had asked for help in early 1903. "This is how it happened," Marcus said, his voice full of anger and sadness. Whitfield saw a chance, a family in trouble, a young woman with no choices. He offered work, probably promised good pay. Then they found a letter in the church records written by Martha Johnson to the pastor in July 1903. "We have not seen our Louisa in 3 weeks. Mr. Whitfield says she is well and working hard, but he will not allow us to visit her. He says it would disturb the household routine. Reverend, my heart tells me something is wrong. My daughter writes to us every week without fail, but we have received no letters. When I went to his house, the servants would not look at me. Please, can you help us?" The pastor's reply was W. Written in his journal. Spoke with Mr. Whitfield regarding the Johnson girl. He assured me she is healthy and content, simply busy with her duties. He expressed annoyance at the family's worries and suggested they are being ungrateful for his kindness in employing her. I am inclined to believe him. The Johnsons must trust in God's will and not cause trouble for a prominent gentleman who has shown them Christian charity. Rebecca then tracked down the Morrison and Wright portrait studio records through the Georgia Historical Society. The studio had operated from 1895 to 1910, and amazingly, some materials had been saved by the photographer's descendants. She contacted James Morrison, the great-grandson of William Morrison, the studio's founder. James invited them to his home in Decatur, where he kept a large archive of his great-grandfather's work. William Morrison photographed Atlanta society for 15 years, James explained as he led them to his study. He kept detailed journals about his clients and his work. He was also quietly the son of an abolitionist and struggled with photographing the darker side of Southern society. James pulled out a leather journal from August 1903. "I've read all of these over the years. Some entries never leave you. This is one of them." He opened to a page marked with a faded ribbon and began to read. August 17th, 1903. Today I performed perhaps the most disturbing task of my career. Charles Whitfield ordered a wedding portrait, but there was no wedding. The young Negro woman he brought to the studio was clearly not there by choice. She wore an expensive gown that did not fit well, and her eyes held such deep fear that I almost refused. Hijab. The entry continued. Whitfield insisted on posing them as a married couple with their hands joined. The woman, he never used her name, only called her girl, began to shake when he grabbed her hand. I noticed bruises on her wrists as I positioned them for the photograph. When I looked into her eyes to make sure she faced the camera, I saw a desperation there. She was trying to tell me something, but with Whitfield watching her every move, she could not speak. James turned the page, his voice tight. As I prepared the exposure, I noticed her fingers moving slightly, placing themselves into what looked like a planned pattern, a signal perhaps. I said nothing, but I made sure to capture it clearly. I took 3 exposures. Whitfield wanted to be sure he got a perfect image. After they left, I felt physically sick. I knew what I had photographed was not a wedding. It was proof of something criminal. But what could I do? Report it to the police? They would laugh at me for even suggesting that a white man of Whitfield's status had done anything wrong. Marcus widened the investigation to look more deeply into Whitfield's past. What they uncovered was a long pattern of exploitation that stretched over many years. Through court files, property papers, and old newspaper archives, a disturbing story took shape. Between 1899 and 1905, at least 6 families had filed complaints about daughters who had gone to work for Whitfield and then disappeared from contact with their families. Each case followed a similar path. A black family in financial trouble. A young woman, usually between 16 and 20, hired as a domestic worker. At first, letters home that suddenly stopped. Family members turned away when they tried to visit. Police reports filed and quickly dismissed. In 2 cases, the young women later returned months afterward, refusing to talk about what had happened, their spirits clearly broken. Rebecca found testimony from a woman named Sarah, who had worked for Whitfield in 1901. She had given a statement to a black community organization that documented abuse by white employers, a record kept outside official systems because official systems refused to listen. Mr. Whitfield kept 3 of us in the house, Sarah said. We were never allowed to leave. He told us if we tried, he would have our families arrested for theft or our fathers lynched. He did whatever he wanted to us. We were his property in everything but name. The testimony continued. There was a girl there when I arrived. Couldn't have been more than 16. She was kept in a room on the 3rd floor, and we were not allowed to speak to her. I heard her crying at night. After a few weeks, she disappeared. Mr. Whitfield said she had stolen from him and run away, but I knew better. She would not have left. She was too afraid of what he would do to her family. I got out because my brother threatened to make noise and go to the newspapers. Whitfield let me go rather than risk attention, but I know others were not so lucky. Marcus found records showing Whitfield had strong connections to local police and city officials. He made regular donations to political campaigns and hosted social events for Atlanta's elite. He had total protection, Marcus said bitterly. The system shielded him, the police worked for him, the courts deferred to him, and black families had no real power. Their daughters could be taken, abused, even killed, and there was nothing they could do. Despite the darkness of what they were uncovering, Rebecca stayed focused on Louisa herself. The photograph showed more than victimhood. It showed resistance. The hand signal frozen in that image was an act of defiance, a refusal to let her captivity go unrecorded. She knew, Rebecca said, studying the image again. She knew that photograph might be the only proof, so she left a message. Through Martha Johnson's letters to churches and organizations, they followed the family's desperate efforts to find their daughter. In October 1903, Henry Johnson, despite his injuries, tried to force his way into Whitfield's house. He was arrested for trespassing and disturbing the peace and spent 2 weeks in jail. The incident reached the newspapers, but the coverage favored Whitfield completely. Prominent businessman harassed by deranged former employee's relative. Martha wrote to the newly formed NAACP chapter in Atlanta in 1903, "My daughter is being held against her will by Charles Whitfield. She came to his home as an employee and is now his prisoner. I have not seen her in 4 months. She would never leave her family by choice. Please, someone must help us. We have used every legal path and no one will listen because we are Negro and he is white and wealthy." The NAACP did respond, but their efforts met the same barriers. Their lawyer, a black man named Robert Foster, tried to get a writ of habeas corpus. The judge refused, saying there was no proof of illegal detention and suggesting the Johnson family was making false claims against a respected citizen to try to get money. Foster documented the case but could go no further without risking his safety and career. Then Marcus found something unexpected. A letter dated December 1903 from a white woman named Eleanor Hartwell, Whitfield's neighbor. She wrote to her sister in Boston, "There is something deeply troubling happening next door. Charles Whitfield has a young Negro woman in his house whom he claims is a servant. The situation seems far more sinister. I saw her once looking out from an upper window. Her face was bruised. I tried to speak with her when Charles was away, but the other servants would not let me in. They were clearly afraid. I am thinking of reporting this, but I fear no one will believe me or care." The trail of Louisa's story went cold after December 1903, and Rebecca feared the worst. Then Marcus found something in an unexpected place: records from Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. In March 1904, a woman named Louisa was admitted with severe injuries, brought in by members of a black mutual aid society who found her near the train station. The hospital notes were brief but revealing. Female patient, approximately 20 years of age, gave name as Louisa but refused surname. Multiple injuries in various stages of healing, including broken ribs, cuts, and signs of long-term physical abuse. Patient extremely traumatized and barely speaks. Shows deep fear of men, especially white men. Patient states she escaped from somewhere in Georgia but will not give details, saying, "He will kill my family if I tell." Rebecca's heart pounded as she read further. The hospital contacted a local group that helped escaped women, including those fleeing abuse and the leftover horrors of slavery. A social worker named Catherine Wells took charge of Louisa's case. Her notes added more detail. "This young woman has suffered unimaginable trauma. She jumps at sudden movements and has nightmares that wake the entire ward. Over several weeks, she has slowly shared parts of her story. Forced captivity, repeated assaults, isolation from her family, and constant threats against her loved ones if she tried to escape." Catherine's notes from April 1904 recorded Louisa's own words. "I was trapped in that house for 8 months. He took everything from me, my freedom, my dignity, my connection to my family. The photograph he forced me to take in that white dress was the worst day. He wanted to pretend I was his wife, that I chose to be there, but I made sure to leave a message in that picture. I moved my fingers just right, a distress signal I had read about in a book. I did not know if anyone would ever see it, but I had to try. I needed proof that I had not gone willingly." The records showed that Catherine helped Louisa contact her family through carefully coded messages so Whitfield would not be alerted. In May 1904, Louisa's mother, Martha, received a letter. "Mama, I am alive. I cannot tell you where I am, only that I am safe now and healing. The man who held me believes I am dead. Please let him continue to believe that. It is the only way to keep you and Father and my brothers and sisters safe. I will write again when I can. I love you. Your daughter." Marcus then found the final piece in Atlanta W.S. Paper Archives from March 1904. A small article read, "Fire at Whitfield Residence Claims Life. Authorities report a tragic fire at the home of prominent businessman Charles Whitfield last evening. One servant perished in the blaze. Mr. Whitfield stated the young Negro woman, whose name was not recorded, had been careless with a cooking fire. The body was too badly burned for identification. The incident is considered a tragic accident, but a black newspaper, the Atlanta Independent, told a different story in careful words. Sources in the Negro community report that the servant who allegedly died in the recent fire at the Whitfield home had in fact escaped weeks earlier. Several witnesses report seeing a young woman matching her description fleeing the property in February. The fire appears to have been deliberately set to hide her escape and to frighten other possible witnesses. Police have declined to investigate further. Louisa had escaped, and Whitfield covered it up by claiming she died in a fire. He could not admit she had gotten away without exposing the truth of her captivity. To protect his public image, he created a false death and moved on. For the Johnson family, this meant they could never openly say their daughter was alive without putting her in danger. Rebecca and Marcus found letters between Martha Johnson and Catherine Wells that continued for years. Catherine helped Louisa build a new life in Washington, D.C. under a different name. She found work as a seamstress and later trained as a nurse. She married a kind man named Edward, a postal worker, in 1908. They had 4 children. Louisa never returned to Atlanta, and her parents had to live as if their daughter was dead in order to keep her safe. Marcus discovered that Louisa kept her story alive in another way. In 1925, she gave testimony to a commission investigating racial violence and exploitation in the South. She did not use her real name, but she told her story. "I was 19 when a white man took me from my family and held me captive for 8 months. He could do this because the law did not protect people who looked like me. He knew no one would believe me. He knew my family had no power to save me. But I survived. I want my story on record so that someday, when the world is ready to hear it, people will know what happened to women like me." Rebecca and Marcus spent 6 months putting their research together into a full historical record. They traced Louisa's descendants through Washington, D.C. records and found her great-great-granddaughter, Dr. Michelle Foster, who taught African American history at Howard University. When Rebecca called her, Michelle responded with immediate emotion. "We have been waiting for someone to find this story." They met at Michelle's home, where she had kept everything Louisa left behind. "My great-great-grandmother lived until 1978, Michelle said. She was 94 years old, and she never forgot what happened in Atlanta. She told us when we were old enough to understand. She made us promise to protect the story, to make sure it was never forgotten. She said, 'Someday someone will find that photograph, and when they do, I want them to know the full truth.'" Michelle showed them Louisa's personal papers, including a journal from her later years. One entry read, "I have lived a good life in spite of what was done to me. I raised 4 beautiful children. I helped bring dozens of babies into the world as a nurse. I loved and was loved. But I never forgot those 8 months, and I never forgot my parents' pain. That photograph exists somewhere with my silent scream inside it. I pray that one day someone will see it and understand. I pray my story will help people see how many women suffered in silence, trapped by laws that denied our humanity and by a society that refused to see our pain." The National Museum of African American History and Culture later organized an exhibition titled "Silent Testimony: Louisa's Story and the Hidden History of Jim Crow Captivity." The centerpiece was the 1903 photograph, shown alongside the photographer's journal, hospital records, family letters, and Louisa's own testimony. The exhibition text was direct and honest. This photograph shows not a marriage but a crime. It shows a young black woman held captive by a white man who faced no punishment because Jim Crow laws and social systems gave him total protection. At the opening, Michelle stood before the photograph with tears in her eyes. Beside the 1903 image was a photo of Louisa from 1960, age 76. Surrounded by children and grandchildren, her face calm and strong. "My great-great-grandmother survived," Michelle told the crowd. "She did more than survive. She rose above it. She turned her pain into purpose, helping other women, raising a family, building a meaningful life. This photograph no longer shows only her captivity. It shows her resistance, her courage, and her refusal to be erased." Rebecca also spoke to the audience. For 120 years, Louisa's distress signal went unseen, but she left it there anyway, trusting that someday someone would look closely enough to notice. Her story is not only about one woman's suffering, It is about the system of abuse made possible by racist laws and social structures. It is about the many black women who were harmed with no protection. And it is about the incredible strength of those who survived and built lives of dignity, despite everything meant to destroy them. As thousands of visitors walked through the exhibition in the months that followed, they saw Louisa's hand signal, read her story, and finally understood the truth that had been hidden for more than a century. The photograph at last fulfilled its purpose, not as proof that could save Louisa in her own time, but as a testimony that refused to let her story disappear. Her silent scream was finally heard, and in being heard, it gave voice to countless others whose stories had been buried by history's deliberate forgetting.